Good morning. Welcome to episode 79 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Justis Mosqueda of Acme Packing Co. He's been writing about the Packers for I don't know how long I've been following on Twitter, but he's a great follow online. Definitely learn a lot about the NFL at large, but especially the Packers if you're into that kind of thing. And we're into that kind of thing right now because the Jaguars have hired, former Green Bay Packers coach Anthony Campanile to be their new defensive coordinator. So I wanted to bring in provide his expertise about Campanile, or more so what the Packers defense looked like last year and what it might look like under Campanile in 2025 and moving forward. But like I said, really excited for you to share your expertise, Justis. Appreciate you joining the show.
Yeah, man. Whenever you need me. Camp spent a year in Green Bay. It was a short time, but I think everyone kind of knew he was going to be a rental. He had come to Green Bay as linebackers coach and run game coordinator shortly after he was getting interviews to be a straight up defensive coordinator, right, in the NFL. He kind of comes from an interesting background, right? He moved his way up through basically New Jersey high school football into college football and then into pro football. Hafley sort of cross paths with him a couple of times. So Hafley and him, they both were at Boston College, but not at the same time. So Campanile was out and went into the NFL right as Hafley basically took over the entire program. But they knew each other from, recruiting days and stuff like that when camp was still, I think he was at St. John Bosco or something. It was some sort of big school.
They had the same thing too, kind of overlapping without actually overlapping at Rutgers too. I think Hafley left as Campanile was getting there. So definitely that pipeline for sure.
They're definitely both Northeastern guys. He was super excited to bring him on. It's kind of funny because the Packers were transitioning out of this quarters heavy scheme, right? Not necessarily the Fangio stuff. Joe Barry was weird because he came from the Rod Marinelli school, right? I think Rod Marinelli is his father-in-law. So think of Lovie Smith, Tony Dungy, all those type of defenses, right? So he came from that school, but then was trying to run this quarter system that was kind of like the Fangio stuff, the Rams stuff when he was at the Rams, and Staley was the defensive coordinator and stuff like that. So that's what they were kind of coming out of. And they transitioned to the single high defense that Hafley had coached, at the college level. I'm sure if you guys watch Ohio State, this is what Ohio State has been doing for, the Bosa's were running it, right? That's really what they do. They play single high football and they just try to get you with the pass rusher. And a 4-man pass rush. That was really an issue for Green Bay this year. They just did not have quality pass rushers. I think Preston Smith was a better fit in the 3-4. They kept him on a contract that was super incentive heavy. And then at the trade deadline, Preston Smith was basically how about you guys send me to 3-4 defense? Because this probably isn't working out. And it's totally fine. I don't think there's any hard feelings there. The problem is the guy starting opposite of Rashawn Gary was Kingsley Enagbare from that point forward. I believe he was a former 5th-round pick. And Lucas Van Ness hasn't really panned out. And they ended up actually firing the defensive line coach and making a different hire there this past offseason. He was one of the holdovers from Barry's staff, if that gives you guys any perspective. But Camp did a really good job just getting guys ready at the linebacker position. Really nothing like what the Packers had before. The Packers mostly were a 5-man front under Barry. Even when they played nickel, they would sometimes play penny, which was basically, the line of scrimmage is the 3-4 defense. And then they're taking one of the inside backers out for a cornerback instead of taking one of the interior guys out and playing a 4-2, right? It was more like a 5-1 if you think about it that way. The Packers under Hafley were really, if you went heavy, they were going to match you, and they were going to have 3 linebackers out there on the field. And, if you put a wide receiver out or a third wide receiver out there, they're going to take one of their linebackers off the field. And he had to deal with a lot of chaotic stuff. Edgerrin Cooper played very well for him when he was healthy. Edgerrin Cooper was a guy who came in raw as hell. He was basically used as like a quarterback spy at the SEC level at Texas A&M. I mean, he was not anything close to what you would think of as a true linebacker. I thought it was going to take a much longer time for him to see the field than it actually took him. And I think he won 2 defensive rookie of the months. At some point, he probably would have won defensive rookie of the year had he been healthy the whole season. Isaiah McDuffie, who is a guy who actually played for Campanile. He actually, was part of the staff that recruited him. I think Campanile was the defensive coordinator there at BC for one of the years that McDuffie was there. And then Hafley got there at the end of McDuffie. He just got signed to another contract, 2-year, like $8 million deal 2 days ago.
Right.
Ready. They kind of knew what his limitations were. I mean, he's 225 pounds and he's not great in coverage, to be totally honest. So they kind of worked around him. Eric Wilson was a guy who's kind of a career special teamer. And because of the injuries to guys like Cooper, guys like Quake Walker, he had to play as a spot starter at outside linebacker and middle linebacker. And he kind of got him ready to do all that stuff. So I think he did a really good job this past year, especially considering that like none of those guys, I mean, I guess Cooper was a high draft pick, high investment, but he was a rookie. But like McDuffie and Wilson were, guys that they got starting caliber reps out of that. Honestly, I highly doubt Joe Barry would have been able to do that type of stuff in his defense. So yeah, that's kind of my whole spiel. I don't know what he's running necessarily in Jacksonville. I would actually be interested in hearing what he said in like pressers and stuff, because the systems are a little different. The Fangio stuff that he came from, and then the single high stuff that Hafley is running now. But I would assume that they're 4 down fronts at the very least.
I think so too. Yeah, that's what it sounds like from not just Campanile, but from like kind of different figureheads in Jacksonville, is that they're going to go to just a 4 down defense. And they kind of transitioned from a 3-4 to a 4-3 last year, going more to a 4-man pass rush. Josh Hines Allen like bulked up a lot, and it seemed like it didn't really help him. Maybe he bulked up a little bit too much. Yeah, I would assume it's going to be 4-man front, a lot of one high stuff, a lot of like what Hafley did last year in Green Bay, and then also what he did like in years past at Boston College. That was kind of one of my questions for you, is like, what do you think it will be, like the Hafley stuff from 2024, right, and he'll just build on that? Or do you think he does have like a decent amount of experience and like knowledge from his previous stints that's not just going to look just like Hafley? Like, I know it's to be determined, but like, what's your best guess?
Yeah, I would assume that if you hired him from the Hafley stuff, you would probably try that. I do think it's probably easier to emulate that than the Fangio stuff. I think people who are not Vic Fangio have tried to run the Vic Fangio defense at the NFL level, and it's become pretty clear that like, unless you're super tuned in as a play caller and you're in the actual booth calling these plays, it's a pretty difficult defense to call. So it's got a super high upside, but there's volatility there for sure. So with the Hafley defenses, basically, and they had to kind of work around it a little bit, because again, they didn't have the pass rush talent. They had a little bit of limitations at the linebacker position coverage wise. They did some interesting stuff, but ideally that defense, what it wants to do, it wants to get after you with 4 pass rushers. It wants to play cover 1, right? So it's, man across the board with the safety in the middle of the field, or they want to play cover 3, which is, the safety in the middle of the field, but then the corners are playing deep zones up the sideline, and you have, all those underneath defenders. It's interesting because the Packers kind of got away with that, or got away from that, because they had to do so much disguise stuff. So like, if you watch the Packers as they progressed throughout the year, they started getting into more funky rush fronts where, you're walking down linebackers to the line of scrimmage, and, both linebackers are bailing from the line of scrimmage, and then the nickel's coming, right? They did a bunch of cover 2 stuff, which is kind of what they want to present as the shell, right? We talk about these single high defenses. It's not that, they're not the old Seahawks where like, hey, it's Earl Thomas who's going to line up top, and Cam Chancellor is going to be the guy in the box. The Packers really rotated those guys, and it was at the snap. and it was a whole lot of like pre-snap coverage disguises, I would say. So they'll rotate strong, they'll rotate weak, but they want the first thing that you're doing as a quarterback is looking at the safeties, and you don't notice that there's a twist up front, and that you got to get the ball out quicker than you expected. They ran a lot of like inverted cover 2 to try to mess with quarterbacks, and they got a good amount of PBUs and stuff out of that. So what that is if you kind of think of cover 2, right, you have the 2 deep safeties, and then the cornerbacks are basically like pressing and playing the shallow zones. Inverted 2 is you're showing up like that, but then the cornerback who's pressed up is actually playing the deep half. So these are one of the few times that, at the NFL level, you're still going to see guys backpedal, right, from a cornerback position. And it's pretty cool. You definitely need a certain type of athlete to be able to do some of that stuff. Like Eric Stokes, former first round pick, he was drafted to play in that Joe Barry scheme where, really they just want you length and strength, press. You're not going to be doing a whole lot more than pressing the hell, choking the guy basically, and then running up the sideline with them. So they were cool with having, a big, tall, fast guy. But once you're having to backpedal and do stuff like that, they were like, maybe Carrington Valentine, a guy with a little bit more wiggle in his game, should be the guy who's doing that. And then, you have safeties in that scheme, right? So if the cornerback's playing deep, then the safety is, he looks like he's playing playing deep, and then he's running toward the line of scrimmage. Either the quarterback's going to miss that, right, and he's going to throw something in the shallow, and it's going to get picked off PBU, something like that, or he's so used to watching the safeties and assuming one of them is going to bail out and they're going to play cover 3 that he's like, oh, okay, then the middle of the field is closed. And nope, there's the wide open hole from cover 2, and you just didn't see it. So everything just kind of collapsed on you, and the timing got messed up. It was really cool to watch Halfley do the inverted 2 stuff. Because again, the Packers were still getting over the cap situation with Aaron Rodgers and all of the dead cap that had been pushed over and accumulated throughout the years. So the Packers weren't super talented outside. I know people point to like the Xavier McKinney free agency signing. But outside of that, like everyone outside of like Gary and Kenny Clark are on rookie contracts. So seeing him get these young guys and figure out how to win with these young guys was super cool. And again, outside of just like the Halfley stuff, like the guys that Camp was responsible for did really well. And they always talk about, his energy in the room and stuff like that. And it seemed like the players loved him and all that stuff. So I have no worries about, him coming across with players or anything like that.
Yeah, that's definitely encouraging because like it's easier said than done. Even if you have like these cool designer plays like inverted cover 2, it's another thing to actually make it work, and especially with a young roster. The Jaguars certainly have a young roster as well. And like going back to 2023, I think we actually saw a decent amount of that stuff try to work with a lot of inverted stuff because the Jags defense coordinator was Mike Caldwell, who came over from Todd Bowles' like Tampa 2 cover 2 scheme. So they were definitely cover 2 heavy, ran a decent amount of like inverted coverages. And it really only worked because Tyson Campbell, I think, was a good enough cornerback to be able to kind of like backpedal and cover that wide area of field. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of exoticness Campanile brings, especially in his first season, and whether not just whether he brings the exoticness and kind of the different change-ups, but whether they're actually able to execute it is obviously a big question. I wanted to ask you more about the safety group because I think that everyone in Jacksonville is obviously going to be like, oh, Devin Lloyd and Foye Oluokun, like how much can Campanile kind of maximize them as a former position coach at linebackers? But to me, the most at least interesting position, I guess, this offseason for the Jaguars is safety because I think the general assumption around town is that Andre Sisco is going to hit free agency. And then they have Darno Savage still. But as I think I heard from you that you pointed out, he's better as probably more of a slot corner or a nickel defender than like a true safety.
Well, so I can tell you this. LaFleur and the rest of the coaching staff said, after they made the transition at defensive coordinator, this, from Barry to Halfley, that they evaluated Savage as a slot. last offseason. So if they're going to run a similar system, if they're going to run the Halfley system, right, you would think that you're still evaluating that guy in a similar position. And the Packers got into an interesting situation. They kind of came into the season thinking that Jair and Eric Stokes were going to be their outside corners. Jair also, obviously dealt with injury this year. Eric Stokes was a guy who just like slowly got phased out of, the lineup for not playing well. I mean, as simple as that. So like Keyshawn, the idea was that Keyshawn was going to play in the slot. Keyshawn Nixon ended up playing outside. It was actually their number one cornerback by the time the season ended. What ended up happening is Javon Bullard, who was their second round pick out of Georgia last year, started the season off as the starting cornerback opposite of, Xavier. I'm spacing on Xavier McKinney. I don't know why I forgot his name. It's too early. It's 6:30 on the West Coast. So he was playing, safety with Xavier McKinney, but then slowly Evan Williams started to pick up steam, who was a guy that they ended up drafting in the 4th round out of Oregon. And he was more of a kind of like a more versatile player, I guess is probably the best way to say it. He could kind of do, jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. And I think that's really what they wanted to pair up with McKinney, because McKinney's ball skills were so good that you really wanted him being the post player for the most part. So they ended up having, Williams be the guy who was kind of like the late addition into the box more often than not. And Bullard actually played in the slot from that point forward. So, their plan was, hey, let's play a corner in the slot. And then they ended up with, hey, our second round rookie is actually playing the slot. And that's probably what they're going to do moving forward, honestly, because I don't think they're going to move Evan Williams off of the spot.
So what do you think would be the best way to rebuild the Jaguars' safety room? Because as of now, like with Cisco being gone, they don't have a free safety. With Darnell being like, he should be a slot, but now Jareen Jones is a slot. So like, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if like Darnell Savage is that random player for the Jaguars that like they grant him a trade request just because he's like, I don't know. I think he was sold a false bag of goods. And so he should be more of a slot. And then they got Antonio Johnson, who's a 5th round pick out of Texas A&M a couple years ago, who's been like solid, but certainly nothing that flashy out of him for the past 2 seasons. And so do you think that when they're, again, building the safety room this offseason, should they kind of try to take the route that the Packers took last year where they have a rangy, splashy playmaker in like a Xavier McKinney type, and then they can pair that with like kind of a cheaper jack of all trades, master of none? Or do you think that, again, going back to like how it's really not Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor anymore, like you do definitely need versatility from both safeties. So like, how do you see it playing out, or how do you think it should play out?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because I think you can do it either way, honestly. Okay. Because if you're starting from a too high shell and you're not just showing it pre-snap, right, you could still do some of these weird rotations. And, maybe your bluff is, hey, we stayed in cover 2 this time. We just didn't rotate, and we're in these spots. So I think you want guys, at least in both spots, who at minimum can cover the deep zone. You don't want a linebacker playing strong safety, essentially. Like that guy's got to have some sort of skill to be able to cover the deep zone, because you're going to be running cover 2 a good amount, and he's going to be in charge of, a whole deep half of the field, even if he starts 12 yards off the line of scrimmage. But I think you can do it either way, because, you can have 2 of those guys who are, kind of combo safeties and just mix it up every single snap. Or you can have a guy like an Xavier McKinney, who's maybe not as strong in the run game, but he's got really good ball skills, and you just want to play him in the post. And those are both kind of decisions that you can make and still present those 2 high safety looks pre-snap while still having, single high post-snap for sure.
So in like a related question, I wonder if there's like a certain position that's most important. I think you probably answered this kind of close to the top when you said it's a 4 down front and they just need more juice up front. But like in San Francisco and in Tampa Bay, like Levante David and Fred Warner are awesome, but those defenses also kind of need them to be awesome because they ask those guys to cover a lot of space. And so like, is there one position, whether it is like you just need 4 pass rushers, or like this defense really needs like a rangy middle linebacker? like what stands out to you as just the most important positions for this scheme?
Yeah, so if you're going to be running the Halfley stuff, I definitely think it's going to be the front. Historically, you can look at this stuff. I mean, the New York Jets will, under Robert Saleh, right, who was the defensive coordinator for the Niners for the longest time and had spent time with the Seattle Seahawks, all that stuff. They'll spend a first-round pick and have that guy be a designated pass rusher who only plays like 35% of the snaps, right? San Francisco will turn over every stone possible to find an extra pass rusher, right? We've seen them take swings on guys like Randy Gregory, get a Chase Young on a rental, right? Like whatever it takes to have juice up front. I also think those Legion of Boom defenses never got the credit that they deserved for the pass rush. I know everyone was super excited about the coverage, but I mean, you had a Michael Bennett who is maybe the most productive player on the defensive interior when he kicked in from defensive end to defensive tackle on third downs. You had guys like Cliff Averill coming off of the edge. You had guys like Bruce Irvin, right? Who's, one of those guys. Again, he was picked mid first round and they were kind of just cool with him being a designated pass rusher, combo linebacker type of guy. So I definitely think the pass rush is way up there, and size is not a super big premium. You have to get after the quarterback, because if you can't get after the quarterback, you're gonna get gutted every once in a while, and then you're gonna have to start doing some of this coverage bluff stuff where you're bringing the nickel. You're bluffing blitzes from linebackers and all sorts of stuff. Sometimes you're gonna bring them. You're gonna drop a defensive end every once in a while. We saw a couple defensive tackles drop. That was always funny. But yeah, if you can't get home with 4, that's when the defense starts to change. And it's not that there isn't answers. It's just like, okay, we just have to play it in a different way. And now we have to be a little bit more versatile, and we're trying to confuse quarterbacks pre-snap, basically. That's kind of how it works. If they run the Fangio stuff, it's going to be way different. So the Fangio stuff is more on the defensive line. You're really trying to slow play everything, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just basically trying to eat up space. And the reason for that is you're having a light box. You're not having that extra safety come into the box and run defense, at the snap of the ball. He has to make his run read. He has to make sure that running back gets the ball before he can trigger. Because if they're playing quarters and a safety bails out and it's play action, there's no help over the top. So they're running a post. That corner thinks it's getting passed off, and that guy's 10 yards ahead of him. It's bad news. That's an explosive play, right? So those frontline guys definitely have to eat more space if they're in a Fangio type of scheme. And it's to slow play to allow those linebackers and those safeties not really be influenced as much by play action when they have a lighter box. So I guess I would say big run stoppers on the interior if they're doing the Fangio stuff, which I would assume would be out of a 3-4. Or if they're out of a 4 down front and they're going to do more of the Halfley stuff, it would definitely be like pass rush juice out of the front. And I understand that that's a pretty big difference, and it doesn't really help you until you know what the heck he's going to run. But those would be my answers.
Well, I think we might get our answer. Like if Mason Graham is available at the 5th overall pick for the Jaguars and they pass on him, then maybe that's an indication that they're going to be running more of the Fangio stuff. Because Mason Graham is definitely like
a little lighter.
He's a little bit lighter. Yeah.
He's also like you draft him for the pass rush juice, right? Yeah, or not even the pass rush juice, but just the athleticism and stuff like that. And if you want the guy to, you line him up on the shoulder of a guard and you want him to slow play a block because the safety is coming down, you probably don't have to spend a 5th overall pick or whatever you guys got for that.
Yeah, exactly. So last question, with all that said, in terms of the conversation of the pass rush, the linebackers, the safeties, are there any, whether it's Mason Graham, Javon Holland, Jair Alexander, or Eric Stokes even, are there any like free agent players or draft prospects that just stand out, like come to mind instantly as just like a good fit that you'd like to see the Jaguars make or add to their team?
Yeah, John makes a lot of sense. I think his whole situation, like they've announced, or it's been reported that they're not going to ask Ja for a pay cut, but they're looking for a trade, which tells me either it's going to be a trade or it's just over, that he's not going to take a pay cut. So he'd rather go elsewhere if he's going to be on one of these prove it deal type of things, which more power to him. I don't blame him for that at all. But yeah, I mean, I've seen some of your guys' advanced stats at the cornerback position. I'd probably want Jair Alexander out there instead of having, who was it, Ronald Darby and those guys.
Yeah, Ronald Darby and Monteric Buster Brown. So it was not good.
Yeah, I saw the numbers. I didn't watch too much Jags football because I was able to tune out pretty quick early in the year. You guys weren't really playoff relevant, but
that's totally fair. And it's not like
the numbers.
One need that like needs filling. They've definitely got a lot of different needs across the board. But it will be interesting to see whether Jair.
Another guy who kind of played well as like a spot starter, Corey Ballantyne. He's probably not coming back in Green Bay because he's a true free agent now. The Packers will probably take a bigger swing at cornerback this offseason, but if he comes in and he's like your backup corner, like the plan is to have him as your backup cornerback, I think he's pretty high-end backup who has the potential to actually play. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up pressing like a early drafted rookie or something like that. So he's maybe a guy to watch. Eric Wilson played some quality snaps for the Packers down the stretch. He was important to them. TJ Slaton's a free agent. He's massive. And he's like 340 pounds. He's really not going to give you much as a pass rusher. But as a run stopper, he's going to be pretty important. And the Packers were pretty specific with their interior defensive line rotation this past year, just because of the room that they had. They were really, what's the best word? They were really, I guess, just specific in the role that Slayton played. So if you look on the stat sheet, you'll see 17 starts. But then if you look at the snap counts, he played like 30% of the snaps. And the reason for that is you want him the heck off the field on third downs, but he's going to help you a lot, on the earlier downs. And he also might be a guy who, if you're running the Fangio stuff, he'd do pretty well in that because 340 pounds, he'd do a pretty good job naturally of just taking up space.
Right, exactly. All right, that's all I got for you, Justis. Really appreciate you coming on. Why don't you let the people where they can find your work?
Yeah, acmepackingcompany.com. It's too early.
Yeah. Right.
We're writing up scouting reports and stuff like that right now. So we just got a bunch of stuff on receivers. I don't know if you guys got receiver need or anything like that, but I ground up the tape and watched some college prospects if you guys want to check that out.
Yeah, no, I think we really just have Brian Thomas and a bunch of jabronis. They definitely need to add depth. They might have like their starters in place at least for 2025, but they could definitely draft a mid-round guy. I think there's a decent amount of Jags fans that want Ted McMillan at 5. I don't know about that, but yeah. So go check out Justis's work at Acme Packing Company, the sister site of SB Nation's Big Cat Country. So yeah, Justis, take care. Happy draft season again, man.
Yep. Anytime.
All right. Peace.